as president of Senegal's PASTEF party, and in line with the party's quest to reaffirm the need for Africa to rethink its relationship with Europe and all its partners, Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko has invited the liberal French politician Jean-Luc Melenchon to Dakar, where they have been set to co-host a crucial conference on May 16, 2024, to exchange ideas on different perspectives and vision of these relationships, which the Prime Minister reiterates must be balanced. And prior to that joint conference, this is a statement that the former French presidential candidate had delivered, ahead of meeting Sonko, the man who really respects him, and perhaps considers him as the most sober French politician as of today. Hello, when this video is broadcasted, in principle, I will have just arrived in Dakar in Senegal, where I will stay until next Sunday. This is an important trip for me. I have been invited there for several months already, by Ousmane Sonko, and also by a higher business school, so that I could present my book titled, Do Better. We said, well, perhaps this is not the time to go to Senegal, to comment on a book, because at that time, Mr. Ousmane Sonko, as well as Mr. Faye, the current president of the Republic, had simply been put in prison. As for the reasons for their indictment, they hadn't really bothered the others that much. First, they started by accusing Mr. Sonko of rape. Then, as it didn't hold up, they found something else, and not knowing what to find, he was accused of corrupting the youth. And on corrupting the youth, it made all those who have a little bit of culture laugh, because this is the reason with which the philosopher Socrates was arrested, judged, and finally committed suicide. All this smacked of a decadence of democracy, and well, many people, whether or not we agree with Mr. Ousmane Sonko and his comrades, at that time took up the cause against the outgoing presidency. So much so, that it first postponed the elections, and we did not know until what date, and then finally, given the scale of the popular mobilization, re-established a date for the elections which were brilliantly won by Mr. Ousmane Sonko's team. But Ousmane Sonko's team was only able to win because there was this popular mobilization, of which it was at this moment, a political expression. I'm telling you all this so that you have an idea of the framework. It is obvious that for us the rebels, we found ourselves boasting a little, as it was a victory for us, since we had committed ourselves alongside Ousmane Sonko. But we might as well say it quite frankly, without having compared our programs, which indeed have some points in common, and others which do not. But mainly because there is on our part, and I think on the part of many French people, a form of particular affection and respect for Senegal and its democracy, and that it broke our hearts, the idea of Senegal ending up in the status of a banana republic with a president who does not want to leave, and so on. So, we mobilized well, and it was a source of perfect joy for us to see that in the end, everything ended well, that Senegalese democracy was saved by its people. But what also matters to us, which we can also say frankly, is that it was typically a process of a citizen revolution that we saw in Senegal. That is to say, it was a popular mobilization, and is not a riot, as they say here, every time they get the chance when it comes to the people marching, it was not a riot. On the contrary, it was something politically lucid, determined by a people who have a culture, a mass education in democracy and who are committed to it. And this is why the Senegalese case is so extraordinarily exemplary. In any case, it ends in the following way: Ousmane Sonko could not be a candidate in the presidential election, and thus Faye, who was the Secretary General until the dissolving of his party, the party of Ousmane Sonko, became a candidate and was brilliantly elected. So much so that, yesterday's political prisoner, Ousmane Sonko, is the Prime Minister of Senegal today, and Mr. Faye, the President of the Republic. It is not the first time, and it is, I do not hope, not the last, that we see a miserable operation of, let's say manipulation of justice, end in this way. Because this was also the case for Lula in Brazil. He was in prison, I went to visit him in prison if you can remember, and then in the end, he had to be released, because the judges, at a given moment, decided in a burst of dignity, that they refused to participate in a political manipulation operation like that. and therefore, Lula was relieved of absolutely all the indictments which had been pronounced against him. I am therefore going to Senegal since the invitations I had received, that is to say those from the higher business school, to which I express the most sincere gratitude, because it is me in this case which had to say, listen, perhaps you can wait a little before giving this political science conference, until we are in different conditions than a popular insurrection. But this school was the vigilant guardian of academic freedoms, and it had not withdrawn its invitation at all, and we came to an agreement. They therefore agreed to postpone this invitation, and that is why I make it my duty to go to this school which is used to handling ideas, and contradictions of ideas, because, as you imagine, my presence anywhere, as a speaker, does not mean that the people who invite me agree with me, but that it seems interesting to them to open discussions, especially in relation to my book, Do Better, which is in a way, an attempt to propose new analytical grids for the reality of our time. It is obviously a political science document, but it is something which attempts to think about the conditions in which human civilization takes place and develops in our time. But this sub-cause invitation from Dakar, well now, it is enriched by a personal invitation from the Prime Minister, Mr. Ousmane Sonko, and you can imagine how proud I am to be able to respond to him. We are happy to do so. On this, the Public University of Dakar also made the proposal that they hear me and the latest news that I have. Prime Minister Sonko, he will come to be with me, and no doubt we will both deliver a speech, which for me is a considerable honor, because I do not lose sight of the fact that he is the Prime Minister of Senegal, that he is the man who allowed everything to end well in Senegal in the end. That is to say that democracy wins, and with it, all the contradictions that a democratic state experiences, and possibly controversies. It will come, I am sure, but for the moment, it seems to me that the Senegalese people are full of immense hope, that the country will take a different direction than the neoliberal policies that were applied with ferocity by the Macronist, Mr. Macky Sall, the previous president of the Republic, who was at the same time was the trigger of the citizens' revolution. In these conditions, for us, there is a particular interest in discussing, in studying with those who were the main protagonists, what happened in this country, how a citizen revolution started, how it concluded, and have the discussions that can only be had in private about what we need to know about such a process. It is he who interests us as much as those who were the main protagonists, or at least spokespersons. So, I think things will be simpler for me since in the period preceding the arrest of Mr. Ousmane Sonko, we had a conference on Skype together, and there was Mr. Faye, who is now the President of the Republic. The man who is now, if I understood correctly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was also there, and together with Arnaud Legault, who is deputy for Val d'Oise. We had a fairly in-depth exchange on the ideas that we all had, of what a non-aligned policy could be. We noted a great convergence of points of view on this subject, but I will not try to tell you things that are not true. I am not telling you that Mr. Ousmane Sonko is a rebel, because there is no rebel movement in Senegal. The rebellious movement is present in France, and elsewhere. Everyone acts according to the politics of their country and the interests of their people. And it's a good thing that this is so, that we can talk to each other, even though essentially, we have the same motivations, but not necessarily the same idea of how to resolve the problems, whatever are the solutions to move forward. In any case, I observed that there were very strong points in common with Ousmane Sonko's program. I am thinking in particular of everything concerning ecological planning and the very specific and very critical subject of forward-looking water management, territorial organization based on watersheds, and so on, subjects that are present in our program. And I also noted that Ousmane Sonko's teams and ours agree on the idea of a movement rather than a party to meet the events that his own country is giving rise to. Likewise, in France, we act as a movement, and not as a party, and this is the reason why the modes of operation can sometimes seem confusing, but they are very well thought out and very organized, in one as in the other. I wanted to tell you all this as soon as I arrived in Senegal. You can see from the sets around me that I recorded before getting on the plane. Therefore, if there are any new developments, I will be able to inform you quickly. As I'm only going to stay for a few days, I said to myself that it might be a good idea so that it doesn't get lost later in everything that happens from one day to the next, that I do on daily basis, or on what I'll do during the day there. So, I won't conclude without telling you that I feel very excited about this trip. It's the first one I'll do in Senegal for a long time, and in a way, I said to myself that it would be good if I managed to mark the occasion, as they say, and I have a sort of debt as a Frenchman towards the Senegalese. It is with regard to Léopold Sédar Senghor, who was the first president of Senegal, that's after its accession to independence. Senghor is an academic personality in France. He was an author, he was a thinker, so obviously, he is a man of his time. We wouldn't say things today the way he said them then. We would no doubt not talk about him in the same way, and above all, the services he has rendered to the common language are such that I think we have a duty towards him, especially since the French were not brilliant. When he died and was buried in Senegalese soil, there was no official of the level of a former president of the Republic like Sédar present at his funeral. And I was personally hurt by it, not that I am a supporter of his doctrines, but by thinking of this part of history that he embodies, common, of the French and the Senegalese, and of the effort that it takes, that we do all the time between us, to do each other justice when necessary. And to have the opportunity to share what we have in common in the best and sometimes in the worst, because there are sequences of history of Senegal which are not to the honor of France. It is better to say it and take responsibility for it. I think that by assuming it, we allow things to happen more simply, more amicably, and more fraternally. With Senegal, we are united by the common language, by a common history, that of our two countries, and also by a universal history. The disgust and rejection of what slavery was, a crime against humanity that one of our own had, the European Parliament recognize, Mr. Yunus Omar Sy. This, my friends, is what I wanted to tell you, and I will meet you, perhaps tomorrow evening.